is look at the database, right? And like see, can I just query it from Postgres? And then from there, you can see, okay, now that I can query it from Postgres, can I perform the query, you know, like just using scicopg2, and then from there using like the class or like an ORM type method, right? But you should always, if something's breaking, you basically want to make it simpler by removing tools, right? Like right now we're using right Python and Postgres together, but remove the tool, like remove Python. If there's a bug, like debug, you can debug first with Python, see if that works. If that's still breaking, go down one level and just move to like Postgres. All right, so here we go. So the first thing I'll do, I mean, we should read the directions, but I've looked at this a little bit. So let's just run PyTest. Okay. So when I look at this, we're kind of getting the same error again and again, which is the database Foursquare test does not exist. If we want to debug that, and I just kind of saw this today, it looks like I can, so I'm clicking on iTerm, and then I can actually press Command here, and then click on this. That's pretty cool, right? And now it opens up to the line in VS Code where the error is. All right. We should have the whole code base open. So let's do Command K, code dot, and maybe exit out of this. But the same thing, if we run PyTest, and then let's say, so what I'm looking for essentially, when I'm debugging is, okay, we have this Python 3, we're breaking inside this scicopg2 library, but I'm just going to assume that library is correct. So I'm not going to try to debug this library. So the thing that's probably broken is what I wrote, you know? And we can see the error is database. This is the actual car crash, right? Foursquare test does not exist. So it's trying to connect, but this doesn't exist. And then you just go up to see what led to the car crash, right? And you want to see what did you do. So this is what we did, right? Was we passed through this Foursquare test. So then I'm going to like go, you know, to where it seems like the cause is, and go here. I like using this tool called Spectacle. Okay, so this is probably true. Let's confirm. How would I confirm? So if checking if the database exists or not, just go to PSQL and then /L, and this thing is called Foursquare test, and instead what we have is, I think it's like test Foursquare or something like that. There you go. This is what we have. So I'll just change the name to this. Okay. Otherwise, I'd create the database or whatever. Let's just change it, run the tests, and okay, we're kind of back to where, you know, a good kind of step, right? This is saying we don't have these methods, but that's okay. That's like our job. The other thing that you could see at this point, like, is maybe like the tables don't exist, right? It could say, like we didn't run the migrations yet, in other words. But I did earlier today. So, but if I didn't, right, how would I do that? PSQL-D, the name of the database, the test Foursquare, and then -F, run the file, right? Migrations, create tables against this database, right? And then after that's done, I like to get kind of feedback on it. So test Foursquare will connect to the database, and then you can display the tables, and then you can kind of see these different tables. All right. Questions about that? I mean, that's the main tools we use with Postgres. So with Postgres, right, it's like, all right, run the migrations. How do we do that? PSQL-D, the name of the database, -F, the name of the file, right? And that will run this file against the specified database. Okay? Then the next thing we'll do lots of times is, you know, we can just connect to a database. So, you know, -C, /C, the name of the database, which is like test Foursquare, and then display the tables, right? And now from here, display kind of like the actual details about the table. So, you know, states, for example. If I want to get like an overview of all the tables, you can just look at the migrations, right? And this kind of tells you what's going on. And what I like to focus on, like when I'm moving through this, what I'm focusing on is the foreign keys, right? So this is not actually a foreign key. This is like the ID from the API, right? The Foursquare ID that we get from the Foursquare API. Let's see, cities. This is a foreign key. This is a foreign key, obviously, right? And then this seems to be kind of interesting because that's two foreign keys, right? So it's a location has one zip code and a location has one venue, is associated with a venue. All right. This is a many-to-many, right? A category. So this is just like a join, and it's saying a category has many venues and a venue has many categories. So one thing, and we could kind of do this by way of the review. I saw this come up yesterday, is just by looking at the foreign keys, you should be able to describe the relationship and therefore kind of know how many entities can come back. All right. So let's like kind of do this as like a bit of like a test, right? So like, just like self-assess. So, okay, we have zip codes. How many cities does a zip code have? Like just looking at the foreign key, right? Just one. Like we want this, you want to start getting this automatic. There's just one. How do you know that? Because if I put the ID here, right? Like let's say we have the zip code, 10128, and then his city ID of 12. Well, how many cities are associated? Just whatever city has the ID of 12, right? Now the other way is if I do a zip. So this is a city. How many zip codes does a city have? All right. Well, there's no zip code ID here, right? So we're not restricted. Instead, the query is going to be something like, select all from zip codes where the city ID equals, the number 12 or whatever. So how many zip codes can come back here? As many as have a city ID of 12. So notice that when I say a city, how many cities or how many zip codes are associated with a city, you're not restricted by a foreign key here. There's no foreign key that's like saying there's just one of it. By contrast, state, right here, for any particular city, this foreign key is telling me there's just one state associated with it. All right? Like which state? Well, the number 12 or 25, whatever it is. Okay? So if there's the foreign key, this is a has one relationship. City has one state. Zip code has one city. Right? Where it belongs to a city. That sounds better to you. And then the other way, a city has many zip codes. Right? Because there's no zip code ID here to constrain it. So if you see the foreign key, this is kind of the rule, right? If you see the foreign key, on that table, this means a city has a state ID. That means a city just has one state associated with it. Okay? Now, this one, right? This is like a join table, and this is like for a many-to-many relationship, right? So this is connecting category and venues. In the purposes of this, right, this is like, we did this obviously on purpose, because we didn't want to restrict category to just have one venue, and we didn't want to restrict venue just to have one category. So what we did was we created a third table that's going to link them together. All right? Because if we put one of those foreign keys on either table, that would mean the table just has one of them. And that's not true, right? Category has many venues. Venue has many categories. Yeah? So neither category, this doesn't have a foreign key on it. And if you look at venue, wherever it is, that also does not have a foreign key of category ID, right? What's linking them together is this third table. So again, you can kind of immediately just look at the foreign keys and kind of be like, okay, this is joining these two tables. This is, a many-to-many relationship. Venue has many categories. Category has many venues. So that's like one level of understanding. The other level of understanding is just like, think of the domain, right? Like kind of like less technical. Like, okay, how many states are associated with like the city of Philadelphia? One. How many states are associated with the city of New York? One. Okay. New York, how many cities does it have? Well, many, right? So the other way is just think of the domain you're in, right? And obviously you kind of want to go through both levels. Like for me, when I was like a junior developer, like that was a skill I did not have. Like to both think of the code and then think of, okay, how this applies to the real world. But that's excellent, like for like catching bugs, for writing tests, right? Like you want to make sure this thing corresponds obviously to the real world. So developing that second kind of level is, that's really valuable. All right. Cool. Then from there, like if I was doing this lab, like I'd probably sketch it out, right? We could draw out the relationships. Okay. And probably what we would see, like what I'm mainly paying attention to is this thing, venue. Like a venue has many categories, a category has many venues, right? This is the only kind of through this table. So that's interesting. I don't know. I'm sure we could find other interesting things if we drew this out. Okay, questions about that. Then we can talk about this thing right here. All right. So let's kind of describe what this is doing. So we just created these, columns, say zip code, where it has like the ID, right? The serial means that it increments the code. This is like the numbers of the zip code. And a zip code belongs to a city, right? Now what this is saying, this constraint is saying, hey, if you have a zip code and you plug in, it's like zip code number 1, the code is 10128. The city ID is 12. If you plug in ID code, the city ID. If you plug, what this constraint is saying, for you to be able to plug in the number 12 here, it's going to look at the cities table and look for, sorry about that, and look for an ID that is the number 12. Okay? So this is saying, hey, this foreign key, this is a foreign key, this column, and constrain this foreign key so that check to make sure that on the cities table ID, there is a corresponding value. So if you plug in the number 12 here, and there's no number 12 over here, it's going to break and say, hey, you're saying this belongs to a city, but that thing doesn't exist in the cities table. So what are you doing? Okay? So that's what's going on with this stuff. So we're identifying, this is a foreign key, venue ID. And so for you to say this location is associated with this venue, it's going to check before you insert the data that that there is a venue's ID value that corresponds to whatever you're plugging in. Questions about that? Does that feel all right?
Yes, is that
Okay.
is that constraint just an internal label, like FK underscore venue?
Oh, I don't totally know. I think this is how. I think what it does is, it keeps track of this value separately. I think, it might even be like a table where it kind of keeps track of this. I'm not quite sure exactly what this part is. This is more like syntax for me, but we can look it up later.
So it's basically working as a if condition constraint?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, yeah, like basically raise an error. You can think of it as like kind of like raise error if, select, it's going to look through the list of venues if there is no venue with that ID, right? If select all from venues where ID equals 1 or 12, whatever it is, doesn't, returns none, right? I mean, like I'm kind of mixing SQL with Python here, but that's what it's doing. That's kind of the logic. Okay.
Does that apply to insert statements too, not just select statements?
Well, it occurs on the insert or the update, right?
Okay.
Before you are able to add this zip code ID value, right? It's going to be like, okay, zip code ID references zip code's ID. So before you add this value, it's going to check the zip codes table.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
That's all right.
I thought it was just on like when you're selecting. Sorry.
No. When you insert, that's when it will break.
Okay.
Other questions about this? All right. Cool. Let's skip to the last problem, I think, which is what, like this venue has many categories, a category has many venues, right? So you can, like, it's the same thing, we can make it easier on ourselves by, so here we are. Do we have select all from categories? I don't think we have anything. This might be annoying, right? Why do we not have anything? Because in the test, right, remember, like, this is the whole point with fixtures, is that we create the thing and then afterwards we delete the records, right? So by the time you look at the test database, like, it's gone. So this is, I don't know if I gave you a console. Did I give you a console? I did not. All right, so that's what you could do is, like, we could maybe we'll do that. Let's just create a console. Just to show you how kind of you can do this on your own if you want. It's probably best to move this. I mean, everything's here. Okay. Well, how do we run this stuff? From source, import all this. Okay, so we'll do the same thing. So here, let's quit out of this. And then let's move the source console.py file over to the current directory. So here's my console.py. And then we can just, like, copy this into the console.py, right? From source, import this stuff. And then let's just see if this works. Python 3-i console.py. That worked. Like, we didn't get any error messages, right? So I can, like, access my category or whatever. Now the next thing we want to do, so kind of our point here is maybe to just create some sample data and store it in a development database. So if you have let's go back to here. Let's list all the databases. So we can see we have, like, if we didn't have a Foursquare development database, we can create one, right? And then the next thing, so maybe I'll just create one called create database Foursquare dev. Okay. And this the point I'm trying to show you this so that you can, it's because you'll run into the same issue of, well, I want to test this stuff out, like play with this stuff and maybe query my database, but I don't have any data, and this thing always deletes it at the very end, right? So what would you do? Okay, so maybe you create a console, you create a database, you can then run the migrations against the database, right? Because if we connect to this database, there's not going to be any tables here. So let's quit out of this and we'll do PSQL. One thing you can do, by the way, I think, is you can press Control R and then you can type PSQL space. You see that? It, like, kind of looks back in time. Dash F. If I do this, it didn't really work. Anyway, this Control R will search through your command line calls so anyway, it can be like a nice little tool to see previous command line calls that you wrote. What else? Okay, migrations. create table. So I'm going to run this not against test Foursquare, against Foursquare dev. I think that's what I called it. I forget. I'll find out. Okay. So I just created tables against that. Let's do PSQL-D Foursquare dev. And now display the tables. And now just like look at maybe the categories one. That looks right. And then venue. Do I not have? Where's my join tables? Right? Shouldn't they be here? Did I delete it accidentally? Venue categories. Create table if not exists. Shouldn't I have a... I don't see it here. It's really weird. I just want to... So maybe what I'm just going to do is just like print out this file. Make sure. Venue categories. Create table if not exists. Right? And now we want to run that against Foursquare dev. Okay. Foursquare, this does not exist. Look, it's only creating... Oh no, there it goes. So create the table. Relation venues already exist. Now creates a table. So how many tables does it create? 1, 2, 3. Here's create table 1, create table 2, create table 3, 4, 5, 6. And now let's go into this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, I guess what I can do, I don't get this. Unless I have a drop table. I don't. What we can do is we can just copy and paste this, I guess.
Because the order matters. It's like,
yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe it's because I messed the order, because I switched this order. I bet you're right. Because it probably what happens is these constraints, I think, are making the order matter. Because if I try to create this and I reference a category, but there's no category table, I bet you it doesn't create. So let's just, you know what, let's move this back to the bottom. So that's probably, you guys get that, right? It's doing the same thing. It's like I had this at the top and said, hey, this should reference a category. But at the time that we ran it up there was no category table. So I think that's the issue. Let's try this one more time. Okay, look, there's a fourth table created. You see that? And now let's go into there. Wow, that's tricky. Good catch, Pally. So now I do DT. There's my venue categories. Nice. Okay, what can we do now? Just to like show you as an example, what you can do at this point is just go to like the test. Go to maybe like the sample data. So test category, build categories, right? So here's some categories. Do I do it with venue? Yeah, so here's like, right, we can just probably copy this, right? And that will give us some sample data, right? So I'll just go to like an extensive test, plug this into my console, right? Let's unshift this. So I pressed, this was tabbed in, so I'm pressing Shift Tab to untab it. And then I actually don't see anything like commented out. So I'm gonna just run this. And what we need though is to replace the test connection and the test cursor with the actual one, with the dev one. So let's just do the DB utilities. We can just, we could just change this name for right now. That's probably the easiest thing to do. The other thing we could do, let's go back to the console.py, is just, change this to be dev connection or something like that. All right, so this is called Foursquare dev. Okay, so we're just for now, we'll comment this out in a second. And now what do we want to do? Python 3-i console.py. You don't even have to do the -i. Okay, it ran. Seems like the saves happened. So the saves, remember, do our insert into this database because you're passing through the test connection and test cursor. So now if we connect it back to Foursquare Dev and do something like select all from states, there's our states, right? So we populated the database really quickly. All right, and now we want to comment this out because if you don't comment this out, every time you run console.py, it's going to resave, right? Perform more inserts. So we want to uncomment that. Okay, what's next? Maybe we can do use like a find all venue class. So give myself some venues. Do I have a find by ID? Let me see. orm.py. Just look for it. Command F. Find. Yeah. Find by ID. I don't. All right. We'll try. Let's see how many venues there are. Select count star from venues. Oh, that makes it easy. Okay. So let's just do a find all here. So find all venue. These will be my two venues. All right, and then what else do I need with find all? So we need the class and the cursor, right? So I'm pressing command and hovering over it in order to see what arguments I need to this thing to take. So the cursor, and the cursor is going to be, I want this to be this dev cursor. So I'll call this connection, and I'll call this cursor. Okay, so you can see this is connected to my database. We create the cursor. We can actually get rid of this stuff because we don't need to recreate any data. And now we can just do venues, and now we'll have some venues. So to do this and interact with it, I can do Python 3-i console.py. And here's, I hope, no venues. Why? Okay, so here's a good example, right? Like, we thought we just created something. Like this is breaking. So what I would do is first look for it in Postgres, right? Go down to the very basic level. So let's do that. Select all from venues. And there they are. Okay, so we know it's not an issue with our data not being populated. So now let's go to the next thing, which is find all venue cursor. So maybe there's an issue with this. Select all from class.table. So let's look at the venue class, venues. That looks okay. Let's go back to this orm.py, cursor.execute, cursor.fetch all, build from record. So what we could do, and let me just look at build from record for a second. This seems okay. So let's, so what I would do is, here's my objects, and then just return them, and now put a breakpoint here, right? Because this will, we know that it's not a problem with Postgres, so then maybe it's a problem with this method. So I'll put a breakpoint at the very end, so then I can look at all the rest of this stuff. Okay. So /key. We'll run Python 3 console.py. That is going to run this, run my find all, Foursquare Dev. We should be okay. Okay, so we're in my breakpoint of this find all thing, right? So now let's take a look. Did we even get any records? That's the big question. We did not. I wonder why. It could be that somehow, like, I wonder what the cursor, yeah, it's hard to tell. I wonder if like we're actually connected to the right database. That's my thought. So I don't know how to actually see that. Find all, class cursor. Do I have any? I don't have any cursor here. So how else would it happen?
Is it pointing to the one in DB utilities?
Oh, you know what? You know what I think it is? Look at this. This is the error, guys. So you can see, here I have this connection. This is the whole issue. Damn, that was tricky. Okay, so I copied everything up top here, including this test connection. Then we replaced test connection and we renamed it. Then we changed it back to connection, but there remains a test connection up here. This test connection goes to here, test Foursquare. And now, what did I mistake? Instead of creating the cursor from this thing, I'm creating it from the test connection, right? Like, I need to just change this. That's the issue, right? Because this thing right here is not related to this, to my Foursquare dev. This thing right here is related to my test connection. Okay? Again, like, how do you solve something like that? Like, just, I know this might seem like a detour, but for me, the way to solve it is to like feel like, okay, there are venues here, and then I'm going to like cursor.execute the same exact statement. So how is it possible there aren't venues there, right? You basically eliminate the impossible, whatever is left is the truth, right? So now we got the answer that we weren't connected to the right database. So let's go to console.py, and this we need to change the connection, and now we should be back. Now let's look. Do we have the object? There's our objects. All right, so that was it. Let's just remove the breakpoint from orm.py, and we are good. Find all. Remove this. Okay, so what was our whole point? We wanted to basically take a venue equals venues square bracket 0 and find the categories. All right, so here's a venue. If you do venue.dunderdict, we have an ID and a Foursquare ID. How would we kind of, now what we want to do is write categories. This probably needs to take, we always know it needs to take self, probably needs to take our cursor as well. And how are we going to query this? Again, we can start with just doing it from Postgres. So let's do psql-d Foursquare dev. And now -dt. So given, let's do it this way. Given a venue and a venue ID, this is our input, right? Is self. So this is what we get. Given a venue, and I'm looking like immediately to just like the primary keys or foreign keys. All I get from self is a primary key, is ID. So I'm like basically just focusing on how do I get from this venue's ID to now the list of categories associated with it. So given a venue and an ID, how do we find the related categories? So let's just do select all from venues. That's fine. Semicolon. So this is our one venue. Okay. So let's try for, as an example, to find this venue's categories. What's the key to doing that? Select all from venue categories where the ID equals 1. Right? This is the category associated with it. Okay. And now if you actually want to get back the actual category, it will be select all from venue categories. We can do, it's not where ID equals 1. It's where the venue ID equals 1, I'm sorry, in which there is nothing. Let's try 2. Okay, we have a couple. So if I look at select all from venues, and we look at this Grimaldi's, Grimaldi's has a couple of categories, right? These two. Okay. So what can we do? Select all from venue categories where venue ID equals 2. Now to actually get these names, these category names, what do I need to do? I need to join categories on categories.id equals venue categories dot category ID. Okay. And let's see if that does any better. So now you can get the same data, but we also get this, what they are. Okay, so this looks better. And then the last thing I would do is we really don't want all these columns to come back. We want the categories to come back. So to change the display, what we can do is categories.star. Like just give me the columns of from the categories table. Let me copy this over to this and let you look at it. So it's like, yeah, I'll let you look at it and then I'll explain it. So the idea is, kind of, we start with the venue categories table, and that gave us the proper categories if we scoped it down to where the venue ID is basically this, this example venue's ID, right? Then we said we want to kind of get the name, of the category itself. So we joined, and that's on the categories table. So we had to join categories. And then we have to tell SQL how these two tables line up, right? Categories.id, where this ID equals the venue category ID. And then finally, we're like, well, it's like you worried about like the view, like what do you see, like what's returned. So we don't want to see all the columns. We just want to see the columns of the category, right? And if we do that, and by the way, this thing, so now let's just do, this is our query. And now we'll do cursor.execute query. And then we pass through the ID, self.id, because that's what this is. So this should be %s, self.id, comma. And then how many is returned, right? Many categories, right? It's a venue, has many categories through the join table. So we should do cursor.fetchAll, right? And these are the records. And then we can do, build from records. This is my category. I'll just call this objects. And pass through. If I hover over it, oh, I'm not even importing this. So let's do that. From ORM, it's probably source. Is there an OR? Where is it? Where's my ORM? From source.orm.
You just use source.build. You don't need to.
Oh, I can just say, you're saying from.
No, you just say the source.build.
Source.build?
Yeah, you already put source. And then
you're saying this already has build from record, is your point?
Yeah.
I see. That works for me. Let's do it. Source.build from records. Now let's just make sure. Now we can view it. So it's the class. This is category. We have models. Let's take, this might also be in source. Let's take a look. Source category. Okay. From source.category. And then finally the list of our records. Yeah, that works. Cool. Let's try it. We'll return objects. And let's put a breakpoint here again, just to make sure. Okay, so we want to call this, let's go back to my console, and we'll call this, right, the venue we were looking for is the second one. So we'll call this on the last venue, right? And then we're passing through the cursor into venue.categories. I broke it. Oh, this is source venue.py, line 2. Let's go to line 2. This is not right. That was a half executed thought. Okay. And now we have my last venue. Last venue dot categories should take me to here. Missing an argument cursor. That's fine. So this is just breaking because I need a pass through cursor here. And this got to line 30 here. Right, so we're right here. So we can kind of work backwards. Look at our objects. This seems right. We can take a look at each one of them. Yeah, that seems like what we saw, right? That there were two categories. All right, that's good. And then we can also, you can always just work backwards, like look at the records. That might be the next thing. All right, so this looks good. And then from there, we're building category objects. Okay. So it's like start from the bottom up, right? That's my advice. Like get the Postgres first and like get feedback, right? Like the other thing is don't just spit out like, I don't know how many, this is still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 lines of code. That's substantial. Don't just spit out like 8 lines of code and then check it, because then it could be breaking anywhere. Like any of those 8 lines of code could be wrong. If you just move step by step, right, then you're like, okay, this is done. We got this. Okay, now the next thing. Now the next thing. Now the next thing. Right. So that's how I recommend doing that. Okay. So the last thing I did want to talk about was just like how to read the tests. But any questions before we move on to that? Remember, we took a minute like building this console, right? And the way we did that was just by basically just saying like, hey, we have this issue with the tests where the tests always delete our data. So it's nice if we just have some sample data that we can always play with, right?
So Jeff, the previous slide you have like about cursor. Like, is it because like you have two like database connection, like
yeah,
the override the old one, like.
Oh, you're talking about this thing, or you're talking about in console.py when I had that bug, right?
No. Yeah, just here, like before you have like a test underscore something like right. So then, so
the real issue was both I left this here and I was importing it, right? Like I kind of knew remember I was saying like I'm just going to do this for a minute. Like the reason why I was like telling myself that is because I knew this was bug prone. They're like, here I have this thing called test connection, but it's really connecting to like a dev database. Like that's not the best thing to ever do, but I did it anyway and then it burned me, So
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm not sure why you cannot get any results back. Like
from the test database, you mean?
Right, the test connection also is connecting, right?
Yeah, but it's connecting to a different database. So it's like test connection comes from here, and this is connecting to the test Foursquare database.
Okay.
And
so there's a table.
There's tables, but take a look at what happens in the tests. Now let's go to the, sorry. I just want to undo what I did here. Also, there's one more question. Okay. Let's go to the test. This kind of is a nice little segue. So this is data, right? Obviously, like this is just some like dictionary data, I guess. Yeah, that's the point of this stuff here. Now think about what happens when you, say, run one of these tests. So this is inside the actual test function. So that means it's a fixture, right? It's not, once it sees any argument inside the test function, PyTest believes in, that's supposed to be a fixture. So then it looks for this, a function that is decorated by this PyTest fixture and finds it, Grimaldi's. This is the issue. Like, notice what happens here. Drop all tables. What does this do? Right? This deletes, calls drop record, delete from each of these tables. So this clears out, removes all the records in our database. That's the first thing that happens. every time you run a test. Okay? Then we insert our data. Okay, so now our database is clean. Let's create some sample data. Venues, venue categories, the location, right? Now we yield 2 Grimaldis. Okay. So what does that mean? This yield brings you back to the test, right? So remember, like kind of when you think of tests, it's like set up, execute the test, then clean up the mess. All right. So here the setup is, because these are database queries like Grimaldis.location, these are database queries. The setup is we need to insert some data into the database. That way, when we ask this venue what its location is, there's something to actually query. So this is the setup. Then we yield. Yield calls the function. Then we execute it, and then finally we clean up the mess. Right? We delete all the records again. Now here, this yield Grimaldis means that it's yielding this object. Right? Why do we do that? Because, well, we want to just yield a sample venue so that then I can call venue.location on it. All right, so if you look at it, if we put like a breakpoint here, and maybe I'll put a breakpoint here too, and then we can call, I don't know, let me just check my ORM real fast to see if there's any breakpoints here. Command F breakpoint. No, okay, we're good. Okay, so now we just want to call this one file testvenue.py. So Python 3, PyTest, test venue, no, that's right, testvenue.py. Okay, we hit our breakpoint. We are in line 44. So now here we are. We are saving the location. So all this stuff has been saved in the database. And now, so it hit this. It ran through all this. And now it's about to yield this Grimaldis. So if you look at what Grimaldis is, right, it's the venue object that has this data there. Notice even an ID, meaning it's been saved to the database. And then if I do continue, so I'll do continue to move to the next breakpoint, to basically keep running until you hit the next breakpoint. Continue. Now we're right here. This is the same, this Grimaldis, right, is the one we created. So when we created Grimaldis up here, we passed it down to this function. And then now we can call Grimaldis.location. That will, it'll break because I don't think we implemented it. But, right, that would call like a select all from locations where select all from locations where the ID equals Grimaldis location ID, something like that. And then that will return an object. And then, right, so this dot tells you that this must be returning an object. So it returns a location object that has an attribute of address. Right? And then finally, this test runs. Hopefully it passes. It wouldn't because we didn't implement it. And then we'll clean up the mess, right? Delete all the records.
So the fixture's name is Grimaldis, and also the object's name is Grimaldis.
Yeah, the reason why, that is confusing, but the reason why I did it that way is because I have to, like this argument, right, this is going to be the name of the fixture right here.
But the other one's the name of the object, right?
Yeah, this is the name of the object. So when I guess maybe it would have been easier if I just called this venue or something, and then it's venue.location. But what's being yielded is this, because I'm yielding this object, it's basically like, you can think of it as this is effectively calling this function, right? So you can think of it as like test and then passing through Grimaldis into this function. So now we call that Grimaldis.location.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm asking, like, when we had that line of search Grimaldis, that Grimaldi's right there is the Grimaldi's object that got yielded by the Grimaldi's fixture, right? It's not something in the Grimaldi's fixture. It's not the Grimaldi's
It's not
fixture
this
itself.
thing. It's not the
Yeah,
function.
okay,
Correct.
okay.
Yeah.
So, but the line 50 get the value from line 33, right? This object
Yes.
get the
Yeah.
value.
Ultimately, yeah. Correct. The venue was created here, along with a bunch of other stuff. Now we're passing the venue to the function and calling the method on that venue. By virtue of this is the key thing. Like, what object are you passing through? You don't always have to pass, this can be blank, in which case it's like, I don't need to pass something through here. It will still run the fixture, then yield to this function. Run the test, in other words, and then go back and drop all the records.
This might be.
So how the yield will decide which function it has to run if you don't pass
because this is what happens first, right? It's not the yield decides.
Okay.
Yeah, just to clear it up for everyone else, because that's a really nice question, right? It's not the yield that figures out what function to run. The order of operations is run this, because it has the word test in it, then see there's a word, basically, inside this test function. That word is always going to be a fixture, right? A variable or an argument. So then it looks for the argument, goes through it, and then yields back to the function, to the test it was originally running, passing through this object, calls it, finishes, then moves to the next test, does the whole thing all over again. Yeah, someone else had a question.
Yeah, this might be kind of unrelated, but I was just looking at the test and I was kind of wondering, we're manually creating everything, like we're creating the venues and the categories, and then the venue categories is a combination. But I'm assuming there's a point where we would when we input all the venues and all the categories, it would auto-populate venue category for us, or is that a wrong way of thinking about it?
No, I don't think it won't auto-populate. So if it's like, how does it know what? So say we create these venues, right? We Grimaldi's, whatever, and we create the categories. But like, how do we know what venue? How would it know which venues are associated with which categories? You know, like the fact that Grimaldi's is a pizza place, like we kind of have to insert that relationship, that connection into SQL.
Okay, so this is then it's kind of a job then to clean our data in such a way that it just matches our database every time.
What are you thinking of?
Yeah. Well, I just realized that there's probably a lot more transformation to do before you load it into your database. Because to me, it was just I figured if you had all this information, but then you have to structure it in such a way that matches your relational structure. And I think the relational structure also means that you might be repeating some information in certain places, right? Or would that not be the case?
You shouldn't be, actually. No.
Okay.
Here we're not. Like if you look at this code, we're really, at least if you look through this, it's like, create a bunch of cities, create a bunch of zip codes. This is saying, this is establishing the relationship, right? This is telling the database that Philadelphia is in Pennsylvania, right? Because it assigns the ID. This is telling the database that this zip code is in Philadelphia, right? So everything, I believe, everything is just like every connection, every piece of information still, at least with this setup, is just stored in one spot.
Okay, so if you were like scraping this off of a Foursquare, you would kind of like get the venues and categories that are associated with each other under like one venue and remember to populate the venue category. Okay.
That's exactly right, and we will be doing that in the next week or so. Yeah. Cool. All right. I would say like review that, like maybe take some time, go back through this. Yeah, like I plan on giving you all, like the quiz probably will come Sunday. So all I care about is like that again. They just like understand each piece. Basically, what I've been saying. You're not just following a pattern, but right, because what I'll do is, for fun, like twist it a little bit. Just because that's the only way I know how to